Claire Monroe never expected the past to come knocking, especially not on a cold, wet evening in the middle of October. The sky was low and gray over her quiet Vermont town, and rain fell in soft sheets as she hurried across the college parking lot, arms wrapped tight around her coat. Her day had been long grading papers, listening to student excuses, sipping lukewarm coffee, but none of that prepared her for what she saw next. Standing by her old silver Honda was a man in a black hoodie, his jeans soaked, hands in his pockets, head tilted as if trying to recognize her. And then she did recognize him, Ethan Blackwood, the boy who had kissed her at 17 like it meant forever, and disappeared just weeks later without even a proper goodbye. Claire stopped in her tracks. The years hadn't erased him, not really. He was older now, 32, like her, with faint lines around his eyes and a quiet tension in his shoulders. But the way he looked at her still carried that same pull, like gravity bending in his favor. "Claire," he said softly, almost as if testing the sound of her name. She should have walked away. She should have told him she had nothing to say. But instead, her heart kicked up a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. "Ethan," she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, "what are you doing here?" He gave a crooked smile, rain dripping from his hair. "Just passing through. Thought I'd see the old place. Didn't think I'd find you." She wanted to tell him how small this town was, how everyone eventually leaves or stays too long, how she had chosen to stay, to teach, to build a life with roots instead of wings. But none of those thoughts made it past the storm of emotions rising in her chest. "You look different," she said instead. "Older," he teased. "Same goes for you." Claire laughed softly, caught between discomfort and something warmer. "Why are you really here, Ethan?" she asked again. Because she needed the truth, not polite nostalgia. He shrugged, eyes scanning her face. "Honestly, I didn't plan this. I was driving east, got tired, thought of you." That was the kind of thing Ethan always did, show up without warning, say just enough to stir her soul, then leave her chasing shadows. But still, despite everything, she let herself feel it. The memory of that last kiss, of his hands holding her face like she was made of glass. He had been her first real heartbreak, the kind that doesn't scream, but stays quiet and deep, buried beneath daily life. "It's been 10 years, she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I know," he said, voice low. "You look good, Claire." "I mean it." She glanced down, uncomfortable under his gaze, but part of her, an honest, lonely part, felt good hearing it. The rain kept falling. Her fingers tightened around her keys. She should have left, should have told him she had a life now, routines, quiet Sundays, a cat who waited by the window. But she didn't move. Instead, Ethan stepped closer, not too close, but enough that she felt it. That slow, dangerous familiarity. "Would you maybe want to grab a coffee sometime?" he asked casually, as if this wasn't a moment tilting the ground beneath them. Claire hesitated. Her heart said yes. Her mind screamed no. She didn't know which one would win yet. "Maybe," she said softly. "Just coffee." But even she could hear it in her own voice, hope, fear, and something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Longing, and that's how it began again. Not with a kiss, not with a promise, but with a name, a memory, and the kind of pull you don't feel twice in a lifetime. Claire told herself it was just coffee. 1 cup, 1 hour, one harmless conversation to put the past behind her. But 1 cup turned into 3, and 1 meeting turned into many. Over the next few weeks, Ethan kept showing up at the corner cafe near campus, at the Saturday farmers market where she bought fresh apples and too much honey, and even at the bookstore, where she liked to hide on quiet Sunday afternoons. He didn't push, he didn't ask for more, he just showed up, and that somehow was worse, because being around him felt easy again. Dangerous, but easy. Claire found herself laughing more, remembering little things, how he used to doodle song lyrics on napkins, how he always added too much sugar to his coffee, how he tilted his head when he was really listening. The kind of small, intimate details that never truly leave you, even after 10 years. Ethan had changed, though. He wasn't the restless, wild-hearted boy who left Vermont with a guitar and no map. He was quieter now, still charming, still frustrating, but grounded in a way that surprised her. "California burned me out," he admitted one night, as they sat beneath the fading lights of the town square, sipping cider from paper cups. "Too loud, too fast, everyone chasing something, and I wasn't even sure what I was chasing anymore." Claire looked at him then, really looked. His jaw was sharper, his eyes a little tired, but there was something softer in his voice now, something honest. "And now," she asked, "what are you chasing?" He glanced at her, then down at his hands. "I think I'm done chasing. I just want to feel something real again." That word real hit her hard, because her life had become so carefully managed. Her house was tidy, her routine solid. She had friends, co-workers, a decent salary, but nothing had made her feel in a long, long time. And Ethan, without even trying, was waking all of that up again. Still, she tried to keep her distance. She made excuses, grading papers, late meetings, errands, but he didn't fall for it. "I know you're scared," he said once, catching her by surprise. "But I'm not here to hurt you, Claire. I already did that. I'm just here." She didn't respond. She couldn't, because part of her hated how much she wanted to believe him. The next time they met, it was raining again. Not pouring like before, just a soft, steady drizzle. They ended up back at her place just to talk, she told herself. Just a glass of wine, just music playing low in the background. But something shifted that night. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore, it was full. Her fingers brushed his when she passed him the bottle opener, and neither of them moved away. His knee bumped hers under the table, and the warmth stayed there, lingering. He looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. "You still bite your lip when you're thinking," he said gently, making her heart trip in her chest. "And you still say exactly the right thing at the wrong time." She shot back, smiling, but it faded as he reached across the table, brushing his fingers against hers. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. But it was a moment, a heavy, breathless moment, that stretched too long, too close, and Claire knew something was happening again. Something she thought she'd buried a decade ago was slowly, dangerously being pulled to the surface. She told herself she could stop it, that she was in control, that nothing had really changed. But the truth was, everything had changed. Ethan was back, and the fire between them, the one she thought had gone cold, was slowly, quietly starting to burn again. Claire had always been careful with her choices, her words, her heart. She built her life like a well-balanced novel, steady, thoughtful, with no room for chaos. But the night Ethan touched her arm while laughing at something she said, all of that care, the neat lines she'd drawn around her emotions started to blur. It wasn't just the way he looked at her now, but the way her body remembered him. The way her skin reacted like no time had passed at all. They had been walking near the lake, the leaves crunching beneath their feet, when she first noticed it. The quiet shift in the way he stood closer, how his hand brushed against hers and didn't move away. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting everything in gold, and there was something dangerously beautiful about how natural it all felt. Claire tried to tell herself it was nostalgia, just memory playing tricks. But when Ethan stopped walking, turned to her, and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, something inside her collapsed. "I should say no," she whispered, almost like she was trying to remind herself. But his hand was already on her cheek, his thumb softly brushing along the edge of her jaw. "Then say it," he said, his voice low and honest. "I will," she answered, but she didn't. Because her heart was pounding, her breath catching in her throat, and her body leaning into his. She didn't plan to kiss him. She didn't plan to let herself fall. But when his lips met hers, everything else disappeared. It wasn't wild. It wasn't rushed. It was quiet and slow, like something long awaited. And in that moment, she let herself go. She let herself feel everything she had buried under years of logic and fear. The longing, the ache, the softness of being wanted again. They ended up back at her house, the night stretching out in slow, delicate moments. There was no rushing, no promises, just two people finding each other again in a way that felt both brand new and achingly familiar. Ethan didn't ask for more. He didn't need to. The way he held her, his hands warm and patient, his touch, gentle but sure, told her more than words ever could. It was intimacy, yes, but also something deeper, something she hadn't let herself experience in years. Vulnerability, trust, connection. When she woke up the next morning, the world outside her window was quiet and pale. Ethan was in the kitchen, making coffee like he had always belonged there. And for a brief, dangerous moment, Claire imagined what it would be like if he stayed. If mornings like this became a habit, not a mistake. But reality, as always, crept in like a chill. This wasn't a love story with a clean start. This was the middle of something that had once ended badly. "This can't happen again," she said as he handed her a cup. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just looked at her with those steady eyes and nodded. "Okay, but I meant every part of last night." Claire believed him. That was the worst part, she believed him. And yet, it didn't change the storm inside her. She was torn between the woman who had protected herself for so long and the girl who had once fallen in love with a boy who kissed her like he was afraid to break her. This wasn't about lust or loneliness. It was deeper, messier, and even though she knew she should walk away, part of her already knew it was too late. She had let him in, and now everything was different. The first snowfall came earlier than expected that year, soft and quiet like a secret, covering Claire's street in a blanket of white. It should have felt peaceful. She loved this season, always had, but the stillness outside didn't match the storm growing inside her. Ethan was still in town. He had been staying in a rented cabin just outside the village, close enough to see her, far enough to give her space. But space didn't matter when his presence filled every corner of her mind. They hadn't spoken much since that night, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much. Claire found herself pulling back just enough to protect the fragile life she had built before he came back. She still answered his texts, still met him for coffee now and then, but she was quieter, guarded, afraid of what she was starting to feel again. And he noticed, one evening, just before Christmas, he showed up at her front door unannounced. The lights from the tree behind her glowed softly in the living room, casting a warm hue across her face. She looked at him like she had 1,000 questions and no words to ask them. "Can I come in?" he asked gently, snowflakes clinging to his hair. She nodded, stepping aside. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was loaded with tension, with feeling, with something neither of them had figured out how to name. He sat across from her, his hands around a mug she had given him, but his eyes never left hers. "You're pulling away," he said quietly. Claire swallowed. "I'm trying to be smart. This, you and me, it doesn't make sense anymore." Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What if it doesn't have to make sense? What if it just feels right?" That was the problem. It did feel right, and that terrified her. Claire had spent years making peace with being alone, telling herself it was better to be steady than to fall and break again. Ethan was her past, and maybe still her weakness. But when he reached for her hand that night, and their fingers touched, she didn't pull away. "I want to stay," he said. "Not just here, in your life, for real." Her heart squeezed at his words, because part of her wanted to say yes. She wanted to believe he could stay, that this time things would be different. But doubts lingered in her chest like frost on a window. "You'll leave eventually," she whispered, voice shaking. "You always do." Ethan stood and walked to her, gently cupping her face with his hands. "Not unless you tell me to." Claire blinked back tears. She wanted to be strong, to say what made sense, to protect herself. But the truth was, he had already broken through every wall she had built. She had let him in and now he was everywhere. In her mornings, her thoughts, her quiet moments. She closed her eyes and rested her forehead against his. "I was supposed to say no," she breathed. "I told myself over and over." But his hands were already on her skin, and in that soft, lingering touch was everything, every word they hadn't said, every feeling they hadn't dared to name. And she knew then, the damage had already been done. Maybe it wouldn't last. Maybe love this complicated had no clean future. But for now, for this moment, he was hers again. And she wasn't ready to let go.